Sometimes the people who change your life are the ones the world never notices. The sharp hiss of steam rose from beneath Claire Bennett's aging blue Honda as it rolled to a reluctant stop on the shoulder of a quiet county road just outside Cedar Ridge, Ohio. Rain tapped steadily against the windshield while windshield wipers struggled to keep up, smearing the gray afternoon into streaks of silver. Claire tightened both hands around the steering wheel, closed her eyes for a single exhausted second, then forced herself to smile before turning toward the back seat. "We're okay, buddy," she said softly. 6-year-old Noah looked up from the dinosaur book balanced on his lap, his small face carrying the kind of worry no child should have learned so young. "Did the car get sick again?" Claire laughed gently despite the knot growing in her chest. "Maybe it just needs a little rest." The answer sounded more hopeful than truthful. The old Honda had over 218,000 miles on it, and seemed determined to remind her every week that it had earned retirement years ago. She glanced at the dashboard. The temperature gauge was buried in red. Her phone showed one remaining bar of battery and almost no signal. Payday was still 4 days away. Her checking account barely held enough for groceries, and replacing a radiator wasn't something miracles usually covered. Noah quietly reached into his backpack and handed her the last granola bar. "You didn't eat breakfast much," he whispered. Claire felt her throat tighten. "You keep it." He shook his head with surprising determination. "Heroes have to eat." She kissed the top of his blonde hair before stepping into the rain. Cold drops soaked through her light denim jacket within seconds. She lifted the hood, even though she barely understood what she was looking at. A cloud of harmless white steam drifted upward while passing cars splashed by without slowing. She refused to cry. She had promised herself long ago that Noah would never see hopelessness win. Almost 10 minutes passed before the sound of another engine approached more slowly than the others. Instead of driving past, an old red pickup eased onto the shoulder behind her. The driver's door opened, and a tall man stepped out wearing faded work boots, worn jeans, and a dark work shirt with a stitched name patch that simply read Ethan. His hands carried the faint marks of honest labor, but his calm blue eyes held a quiet confidence that immediately softened the tension in the rainy afternoon. "Looks like she's overheating," he said with an easy smile. "Mind if I take a look?" Claire hesitated. Years of raising Noah alone had taught her caution first and trust second. Ethan seemed to notice without taking offense. He stopped several feet away, keeping a respectful distance. "My garage is about 2 miles down the road," he added. "If I can't help, I'll at least call someone who can." Noah cracked open the back window just enough to peek outside. "Mom," he whispered excitedly. "He looks like the mechanics in my coloring book." Ethan heard him and chuckled. "I hope that's a compliment." Noah nodded with complete seriousness. "It is." Claire couldn't remember the last time a stranger had made her son smile that quickly. Something about Ethan felt steady, like someone who never hurried because he never needed to prove anything. She finally stepped aside. "Thank you," she said quietly. Ethan rolled up his sleeves, examined the engine with practiced movements, and within moments spotted a cracked upper radiator hose. "Nothing scary," he said. "You caught it before it became worse." Claire released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Can it be fixed?" Ethan looked toward the cloudy sky before smiling again. "Yeah, give me about 20 minutes. He walked back to his pickup and returned carrying a small toolbox and a replacement hose that looked almost too perfect to be coincidence. Claire frowned. "You just happen to have that." Ethan shrugged lightly. "Funny how life works sometimes." As he worked beneath the raised hood with quiet focus, Noah climbed out holding an umbrella far too large for his little frame and carefully stood beside him to keep the rain off the open engine. Ethan glanced up and smiled. "Looks like I hired the best assistant in Ohio." Noah beamed with pride while Claire watched the scene in silence. For the first time in months, the relentless weight on her shoulders felt just a little lighter. Though she had no idea the man tightening the final bolt beneath her hood owned an automotive empire worth billions, or that this ordinary roadside repair would become the beginning of a story neither of them could have imagined. Claire insisted on paying something before leaving, but Ethan only wiped his hands with a clean shop towel and shook his head with an easy smile. "Just bring the car by the garage next week so I can make sure everything is still running the way it should," he said. She thanked him one more time before driving away, watching him grow smaller in the rearview mirror until the rain swallowed the old red pickup from sight. For reasons she could not explain, the road home no longer felt quite as lonely. 3 days later, true to her promise, Claire pulled into a modest brick garage on the edge of town. A weathered wooden sign above the entrance read Cedar Ridge Auto Repair. There were no flashy advertisements, no polished showroom, only the familiar scent of motor oil, fresh coffee, and hard work. Ethan was underneath an old pickup truck when Noah spotted him first. "Mom, it is my mechanic," he shouted before racing toward the open service bay. Ethan rolled out on a mechanic's creeper, laughing as Noah proudly held up a drawing he had made with crayons. It showed a bright red truck, a blue car, and 3 smiling stick figures standing beneath a rainbow. Across the top, in large, uneven letters, Noah had written, "Thank you for fixing my mom." Ethan accepted the picture as though it belonged in an art museum instead of a repair shop. "I think this deserves the best spot in the garage," he said. He carefully taped it beside his workbench, where every customer could see it. Claire noticed several mechanics smiling as they walked past. Nobody teased him. Nobody questioned why a simple drawing seemed to matter so much. While Ethan inspected the Honda, Claire sat on an old wooden bench sipping coffee from a paper cup one of the employees had quietly offered her. She watched Ethan explain every repair in plain language instead of confusing technical terms. He never tried to sell unnecessary parts. He even showed Noah how a wrench worked, letting the little boy tighten one harmless bolt with both hands while celebrating the accomplishment like it was the greatest repair ever completed. "You have a natural helper," Ethan said. Noah stood taller than ever. "Can mechanics be superheroes?" Ethan smiled without looking away from the engine. "The good ones try to be." Claire found herself smiling before she realized it. It had been a long time since she had seen a grown man speak to her son with genuine patience instead of polite obligation. As the afternoon passed, she began noticing details that did not quite fit the picture she had imagined. Ethan spoke with unusual precision, choosing his words carefully without sounding rehearsed. When another mechanic struggled to diagnose an electrical problem, Ethan quietly suggested a solution that fixed the issue within minutes. Later, a delivery driver apologized for arriving late with replacement parts, but Ethan simply thanked him for driving safely through heavy traffic. There was no frustration, no raised voice, only calm respect that seemed to spread naturally through the entire shop. An elderly customer entered carrying an estimate from another garage that charged almost twice as much. Ethan studied the paper for less than a minute before handing it back. "You do not need half these repairs," he said kindly. "Save your money. Let us fix what actually needs fixing." The older man stared in disbelief before slowly smiling with relief. Claire watched the exchange from across the waiting area. Most people talked about honesty. Ethan practiced it as though it required no effort at all. When the inspection was finished, he returned her keys with another reassuring smile. "She is doing great. You should get many more miles out of her now." Claire reached for her wallet. Ethan accepted only the cost of the replacement hose from earlier and refused to charge for his labor. "Neighbors take care of neighbors," he said simply. Driving home that evening, Noah hugged the small toy wrench Ethan had given him and announced with complete certainty, "When I grow up, I want to fix cars just like him." Claire glanced at her son through the rearview mirror before looking back at the quiet country road stretching ahead. She had gone there expecting to find a dependable mechanic. Instead, she was beginning to wonder how someone with so little seemed capable of giving everyone around him exactly what they needed. Over the next several weeks, Cedar Ridge Auto Repair quietly became part of Claire Bennett's routine. Sometimes she stopped by because the Honda made a strange noise. Sometimes she claimed the tires needed to be checked. More often than not, the car was perfectly fine, but she still found herself turning into the familiar gravel parking lot after work. Ethan never questioned the reason. He simply greeted her with the same calm smile that somehow made even the busiest afternoons feel unhurried. Noah treated every visit like an adventure. The little boy hurried through the service bay carrying his growing collection of questions. Why did engines get hot? How did brakes stop a car? Why did some old trucks sound louder than others? Ethan answered every single question with endless patience, never speaking down to him or rushing him away. Soon Noah had his own tiny toolbox filled with harmless plastic tools that Ethan had collected from a discount store. Every Saturday morning, he proudly wore a miniature work shirt with his first name stitched across the pocket, insisting he was the garage's youngest mechanic. The employees laughed warmly whenever he marched across the concrete floor carrying a flashlight almost as long as his arm. Claire noticed something else as the weeks passed. People trusted Ethan in ways that had nothing to do with repairing vehicles. Elderly customers stayed for coffee long after their cars were finished. Teenagers came asking for advice about jobs. Young parents stopped by just to let him look under the hood before long road trips. Somehow, everyone left smiling, whether they had spent $10 or nothing at all. One afternoon, Claire arrived after finishing an extra shift at the grocery store. She looked exhausted, and Ethan noticed immediately. Without asking questions, he placed a warm cup of coffee on the counter before. She even sat down. "Long day?" he asked gently. Claire laughed quietly. "I think I forgot what a short one feels like." Ethan nodded with understanding instead of sympathy. "You are doing better than you think." She looked at him for a moment. "How can you always tell?" He smiled toward the open garage door where sunlight stretched across the concrete floor. "Because people who keep showing up every day usually underestimate how strong they really are." His words settled somewhere deep inside her. Nobody had called her strong in years. Most people called her busy, tired, or unlucky. Ethan had somehow seen something different. As Noah busied himself helping another mechanic organize sockets by size, Claire wandered toward a bookshelf tucked into the corner office. Instead of automotive magazines, she found biographies of inventors, business leaders, and engineers alongside classic American novels. She picked up one of the books with surprise. "I did not expect to find this in a repair shop." Ethan chuckled while tightening a bolt on a customer vehicle. "Machines tell stories too. Somebody had to imagine them before somebody else could build them." His answer lingered in her thoughts long after she set the book back on the shelf. Later that afternoon, a supplier accidentally delivered several expensive parts meant for another garage across town. The driver apologized repeatedly, clearly worried about the mistake. Ethan simply helped him reload every box into the truck and even handed him a bottle of cold water before sending him safely on his way. "Everyone has hard days," he said quietly after the truck disappeared. "No reason to make one harder." Claire watched him from the waiting area, realizing she could no longer remember whether she admired him because he was kind or because kindness seemed to be the most natural thing about him. On the drive home, Noah hugged his little toolbox against his chest and smiled through the open window at the fading sunset. "Mom," he said softly, "I think Ethan fixes more than cars." Claire kept her eyes on the quiet country road, but she could not hide her smile. Deep in her heart, she knew her son was right, although neither of them could have imagined that the man who quietly repaired broken engines was carrying a far greater secret than either of them had yet begun to suspect. Autumn settled gently over Cedar Ridge, painting the maple trees in shades of amber and crimson, while Claire found herself measuring the passing weeks not by the calendar, but by the afternoons she and Noah spent at the garage. What had begun as gratitude slowly became friendship, and friendship quietly grew into something she was almost afraid to name. Ethan never crossed a line, never made grand promises, and never tried to impress her with anything except simple consistency. If he said he would call to remind her about an oil change, he called. If Noah asked him to save an empty spark plug for his growing collection, it was waiting in a small paper bag with the boy's name written neatly across the front. Claire had spent years believing dependable people only existed in stories. Somehow one had appeared in her ordinary life, wearing grease-stained work boots. One Saturday afternoon, the garage became unusually busy after several families returned from weekend trips with minor car troubles. Claire offered to help organize the waiting area, while Noah proudly handed out bottles of water to customers. Ethan thanked both of them as though they were longtime members of the team instead of visitors. The atmosphere felt more like a neighborhood gathering than a business. Children colored at a small table in the corner, while older customers shared stories over fresh coffee. Claire realized she had not felt this comfortable anywhere outside her own home in years. Then something unusual happened. A glossy black Rolls-Royce slowly pulled into the parking lot, its polished finish standing out sharply against the dusty pickups and family sedans surrounding it. The expensive sedan remained parked near the entrance without anyone stepping out for several moments. Finally, a man in an elegant charcoal suit climbed out carrying a leather portfolio. He looked around before walking directly toward Ethan with purposeful steps. Claire expected Ethan to greet him immediately, But instead, Ethan quietly finished tightening the last lug nut on a customer's tire before wiping his hands clean. Only then did he approach the visitor. They exchanged a brief conversation too far away for Claire to hear. The suited man appeared respectful, almost unusually careful with his words. Ethan listened calmly, nodded once, and accepted a sealed envelope before saying something that caused the visitor to lower his head slightly in acknowledgement. Less than a minute later, the man returned to the luxury car and drove away. Claire watched through the office window, puzzled by what she had just witnessed. "Do you know him?" she asked casually after Ethan came back inside. He slipped the unopened envelope into a drawer beneath the counter and smiled. "Just someone from an old chapter of my life." His answer was polite, but offered nothing more. Claire considered asking another question, yet something about his expression suggested he preferred to leave the subject alone. She respected that. Later that evening, another small surprise arrived. While Noah proudly swept the garage floor with a child-sized broom, one of the mechanics accidentally mentioned that Ethan had taken an unexpected day off the previous month to attend an engineering conference in Chicago. Claire blinked with confusion. "I thought Ethan only worked on cars." The mechanic laughed. "He knows more about designing them than anyone I have ever met." Before Claire could ask another question, Ethan walked back into the room carrying a fresh box of donuts for everyone, and the conversation naturally drifted elsewhere. Driving home beneath the glowing orange sunset, Claire replayed the day in her mind. The expensive visitor, the mysterious envelope, the engineering conference. None of it matched the humble mechanic she thought she knew. Yet every strange detail only seemed to deepen the mystery instead of answering it. Meanwhile, several miles away, the same black Rolls-Royce waited quietly beneath the lights of a deserted parking lot. Its driver glanced at his phone before sending a brief message that read, "The board meeting cannot be postponed any longer. Everyone is waiting for your return." Ethan looked down at the notification, let out a slow, thoughtful breath, and silently slipped the phone back into his pocket before returning to close the garage for the night. The following Tuesday began like any other. Claire dropped Noah off at school before heading to the grocery store for her morning shift, expecting another ordinary day filled with stocking shelves, helping customers, and stretching every dollar as far as it could possibly go. Around noon, her phone buzzed with a text message from Ethan. It was short and simple. "If you have time after work, stop by the garage. Noah left something important here." Claire smiled immediately. She already knew exactly what it was. Noah had become so attached to his little toolbox that forgetting it anywhere was almost impossible. Still, she looked forward to seeing Ethan, even if only for a few minutes. By the time she arrived that afternoon, the garage looked strangely quiet. Only one service bay remained open, and several tool cabinets stood locked for the day. Ethan was sitting at the wooden picnic table behind the building with 2 cups of fresh coffee waiting. "I thought business was slow," Claire said as she joined him. Ethan gave a small, thoughtful smile. "Not exactly. Sometimes life asks you to step away from one responsibility so you can face another." She noticed he seemed more reflective than usual. His eyes remained calm, but there was a weight behind them that she had never seen before. Before she could ask what was wrong, Noah came running from inside, carrying his forgotten toolbox above his head like a trophy. Ethan laughed warmly and handed him a chocolate chip cookie that someone from the bakery next door had dropped off earlier that morning. Noah hurried to a nearby patch of grass where he began pretending to repair his favorite toy truck. Watching him play, Claire quietly asked, "Is everything all right?" Ethan looked toward the fading afternoon sunlight before answering. "Have you ever felt like 2 different parts of your life were pulling you in opposite directions?" Claire nodded almost immediately. "Every day, being a parent, paying bills, trying to plan for tomorrow while surviving today." Ethan smiled softly. "Then you understand more than most people." Before either of them spoke again, the familiar black Rolls-Royce slowly entered the parking lot once more. This time it did not remain outside. The same sharply dressed man stepped out, accompanied by a woman carrying a tablet and several folders. Both of them walked directly toward Ethan. Claire instinctively stood, prepared to leave and give them privacy, but Ethan gently shook his head. "You do not have to go." The visitors greeted him with unmistakable respect. "Sir," the woman said carefully, "everyone has arrived. They cannot delay the meeting any longer." Ethan remained silent for several seconds. Finally, he answered in an even voice. Please tell them I will not be there today." The man in the suit looked genuinely concerned. This decision affects thousands of employees. Ethan met his eyes calmly. Then they deserve a leader who makes thoughtful decisions, not rushed ones. Neither visitor argued. They simply nodded before returning to the luxury sedan and quietly driving away once again. Claire stared after the disappearing car, completely puzzled. "You keep meeting very important people for someone who says he just fixes engines," she said with a teasing smile, hoping he would finally explain. Ethan looked down at the untouched coffee in his hands before smiling back, although this time there was unmistakable sadness behind it. Everyone has parts of their life they are still trying to figure out. Claire accepted the answer even though it explained almost nothing. She had learned that trust sometimes meant allowing unanswered questions to exist. As the evening settled over Cedar Ridge, Noah climbed onto the picnic bench between them and happily announced that one day he wanted to build a garage exactly like this one. Ethan rested a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder and looked across the quiet parking lot where the last rays of sunlight reflected against the closed service bays. For a brief moment, he seemed completely at peace, as though this simple little garage meant more to him than any place in the world. Neither Claire nor Noah realized they were watching a man silently choosing the life he loved, even while another life kept calling him back. 3 mornings later, Claire's store manager asked if she could make a special grocery delivery to a corporate office in downtown Columbus because another employee had called in sick. The extra hours meant extra pay, and Claire never turned down honest work. After dropping Noah off at school, she loaded several catering trays into the back of her Honda and began the 90-mile drive toward the city. The towering glass buildings felt like another world compared to the quiet streets of Cedar Ridge. Following the directions on the invoice, she pulled into the underground delivery entrance of an impressive skyscraper with the words Brooks Automotive Group displayed across the front in polished steel letters. Security directed her toward a private freight elevator reserved for deliveries. Everything inside the building reflected precision and quiet professionalism. Employees moved confidently through bright marble hallways, while digital displays showcased concept vehicles and future engineering projects. Claire admired the photographs lining the walls without paying much attention to the names beneath them. Her thoughts were still on getting back in time to pick up Noah from school. As she waited outside a large conference floor for someone to sign the delivery receipt, a sudden hush spread across the hallway. Conversation stopped. Several executives straightened their jackets. Administrative assistants quietly stepped aside. Claire looked up, curious about what had changed. The elevator doors opened, and her heart nearly stopped. Ethan stepped out wearing a perfectly tailored navy blue suit, instead of grease-stained work clothes. His posture was exactly the same, his calm expression unchanged, but everything around him was different. Men and women who looked twice his age greeted him with unmistakable respect. "Good morning, Mr. Brooks," one executive said. "The board is ready whenever you are," another added. Ethan acknowledged each person with a warm nod before walking toward the conference room. For one impossible second, his eyes met Claire's across the hallway. Surprise flickered across his face. He took a single step in her direction though he wanted to explain everything. Before he could speak, the chairman of the board approached carrying several presentation folders. "We have been waiting for you, sir." Claire looked from Ethan to the enormous conference room where his name appeared on a digital display beside the words Chief Executive Officer. The delivery clipboard nearly slipped from her hands. Memories rushed together all at once. The engineering books, the mysterious meetings, the luxury car, the respectful visitors, the unanswered phone calls. Every strange detail suddenly fit together with perfect clarity. Ethan was not an ordinary mechanic. He was the leader of one of the largest automotive companies in the country. Claire felt the air leave her lungs. She had shared coffee with him at a weathered picnic table. Noah had proudly called him his favorite mechanic. She had trusted him with pieces of her heart without ever knowing who he truly was. Ethan quietly excused himself from the executives and started walking toward her. "Claire," he said gently, his voice carrying the same warmth she knew so well. She instinctively stepped backward. There was no anger in her eyes, only disbelief so deep it left her speechless. After several long seconds, she managed to whisper, "Who are you?" Ethan opened his mouth to answer, but no explanation seemed large enough to bridge the distance that had suddenly appeared between them. Claire lowered her eyes, handed the signed delivery receipt to the nearest assistant, and turned toward the elevator without another word. As the doors slowly closed, she saw Ethan still standing in the hallway, surrounded by executives who waited for their billionaire chief executive officer, while the only person whose opinion truly mattered to him quietly disappeared from sight. Claire drove home from Columbus in complete silence. The radio remained off, and even the familiar hum of the old Honda seemed distant beneath the endless questions racing through her mind. Every memory she had treasured over the past several months now felt different. She remembered Ethan's stained work shirt, the quiet coffee at the picnic table, the afternoon spent teaching Noah how to hold a wrench, and every gentle smile that had slowly convinced her it was safe to trust again. None of those moments had been false, yet suddenly she could not tell which parts had been real and which parts had belonged to a life carefully hidden from her. When she picked Noah up from school that afternoon, he immediately noticed something had changed. "Did something bad happen?" he asked softly as he climbed into the back seat. Claire forced a small smile into the rearview mirror. "Just a long day, sweetheart." Noah accepted the answer, but he quietly watched his mother all the way home. 2 days passed without Claire visiting the garage. Ethan called once. She stared at his name on the screen until the ringing stopped. He sent a short message asking if she and Noah were all right. She read it several times before placing the phone face down on the kitchen table without replying. She did not know what to say. It was not the money that hurt. It was not even the title of chief executive officer. It was the silence. She had trusted him with the truth about every struggle in her life. He had known how carefully she counted every dollar, how frightened she had been after raising Noah alone, how difficult it had been to believe in people again. Through all those conversations, he had never once said who he really was. On Saturday morning, Noah walked into the kitchen wearing his little mechanic shirt and carrying the plastic toolbox Ethan had given him. "Can we go see him today?" he asked hopefully. Claire knelt beside her son and gently brushed a strand of blonde hair away from his forehead. "Not today." Noah looked confused. "Did I do something wrong?" Her heart tightened. "No, sweetheart. You did everything right." The little boy hugged his toolbox against his chest before quietly returning to his room. Later that afternoon, Claire decided to drive past the garage on her way home from buying groceries. She told herself it was only because the route was shorter, but deep inside she knew she wanted to see whether Ethan was there. As she approached the familiar building, she slowed almost without thinking. Ethan stood outside alone, sweeping fallen leaves away from the entrance exactly as he had done countless times before. He was wearing the same faded work shirt, the same worn boots, and the same calm expression she had first seen beside the roadside months earlier. For a brief moment, he looked up and noticed the blue Honda approaching. Their eyes met through the windshield. Ethan did not wave. He did not chase after her. He simply stood there with quiet hope in his eyes, allowing her the freedom to decide. Claire tightened her grip on the steering wheel and continued driving without stopping. In the rearview mirror, she watched the garage slowly disappear behind the autumn trees until it was completely out of sight. That evening, after Noah had fallen asleep, she opened the small wooden box where she kept the memories that mattered most. Inside were old family photographs, Noah's first hospital bracelet, and the simple drawing he had made for Ethan on their second visit to the garage. She gently traced the uneven crayon letters that read, "Thank you for fixing my mom." Tears quietly filled her eyes because she suddenly realized something that only made everything more complicated. Ethan had never asked for her trust. He had earned it one ordinary day at a time. The only question she could no longer answer was whether the man she had fallen for had been pretending to be a mechanic, or whether the mechanic had always been the truest part of the man. The following Monday morning, Claire found a small white envelope tucked beneath the windshield wiper of her Honda before leaving for work. There was no signature on the outside, only her name written in neat, familiar handwriting. She opened it slowly, expecting an apology or an explanation, but instead she found a single folded sheet of paper. "If you never wish to see me again, I will respect your decision. But there are some truths that belong to you because you trusted me before you knew my last name. I will be at the garage after 6 o'clock this evening. You deserve answers, whether you choose to forgive me or not." Claire read the note 3 times before carefully folding it back into the envelope. All day long she tried to focus on work, but every customer, every grocery cart, and every passing hour brought her closer to 6 o'clock. She did not know whether she wanted answers or simply wanted the confusion to end. That evening, after dropping Noah off with her elderly neighbor for an hour, she quietly drove towards Cedar Ridge Auto Repair. The parking lot was empty except for Ethan's old red pickup. The service bay doors were closed, and only a single light glowed above the office. Ethan was waiting exactly where he had promised, sitting alone at the same wooden picnic table where they had shared coffee so many afternoons before. He stood as she approached, but made no move to close the distance between them. "Thank you for coming," he said softly. Claire remained standing. "Please tell me one thing first. Was any of it real?" Ethan met her eyes without hesitation. "Every moment with you and Noah was real." The sincerity in his voice made it difficult to look away. After a long silence, Claire finally sat across from him. Ethan rested his hands on the weathered tabletop before speaking again. "When my father passed away 8 years ago, he left me this company and one piece of advice. He said that if I ever forgot what ordinary people worried about every morning, I would eventually become the wrong person to lead them. Since then, I have spent several months every year living and working without anyone knowing who I am. Not because I enjoy pretending, but because I never want to make decisions from behind glass walls and conference tables alone." Claire listened quietly, saying nothing. Ethan continued, "This garage belonged to the mechanic who taught me everything about engines when I was 16 years old. After he retired, I bought the building from him with one condition. I would still be allowed to work here whenever I needed to remember why our company exists. Nobody in Cedar Ridge cared about my title. They cared whether I showed up when their car broke down. That matters more than any board meeting ever could." Claire looked toward the familiar service bays where Noah had laughed, learned, and dreamed about becoming a mechanic. Suddenly, every memory felt different once again, but this time not because it had been false. It was because she finally understood why Ethan had always seemed more interested in people than in success. "Why did you never tell me?" she asked quietly. Ethan lowered his eyes for the first time. "Because the day I met you on that rainy road, you thanked a stranger before you knew anything about him. Noah trusted me because I fixed his mother's car, not because I owned a company. And somewhere along the way I realized that if I told you too soon, I would never know whether the life we were building belonged to Ethan the man or Mr. Brooks the billionaire." Claire felt tears gather despite her effort to remain composed. Ethan did not reach across the table. He did not ask for forgiveness. He simply spoke the truth that had weighed on his heart for months. "I never lied about caring for you. I only waited too long to tell you the rest of my story." Claire sat quietly for several minutes after Ethan finished speaking. The familiar sounds of the garage surrounded them once again. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle drifted through the evening air, and fallen leaves rolled gently across the empty parking lot. Nothing around her had changed, yet everything inside her had. She finally looked at Ethan with eyes no longer clouded by shock, but searching for something deeper. "Do you still have to go back to that other life?" she asked softly. Ethan smiled with quiet honesty. "Every day, but I finally understand that I do not have to leave this one behind to do it." For the first time since discovering the truth, Claire allowed herself a small smile. It was not complete forgiveness. It was the beginning of understanding. Over the following weeks, Ethan did something Claire never expected. He did not try to impress her with expensive gifts or extravagant gestures. Instead, every Saturday morning he unlocked the garage wearing the same faded work shirt, brewed the same pot of coffee, and greeted every customer exactly as he always had. During the week, he led board meetings, approved engineering projects, and guided one of the largest automotive companies in America. On weekends, he repaired old pickup trucks, replaced worn brake pads, and patiently answered Noah's endless questions about engines. Eventually, the people in Cedar Ridge learned the truth about the quiet mechanic they had known for years. To Claire's surprise, almost nobody treated him differently. Mrs. Dawson still brought homemade apple pie every Friday afternoon. The retired school bus driver still argued with him about baseball scores. Local farmers still asked him to listen to mysterious engine noises that only seemed to appear during harvest season. Ethan laughed exactly as he always had, grateful that in Cedar Ridge he would always be measured by his character before his success. One crisp Saturday morning, Brooks Automotive Group announced a new nationwide community initiative. Instead of building another luxury showroom, the company would invest in neighborhood repair centers that offered free automotive training, financial literacy classes, and career opportunities for single parents and young adults beginning new chapters in life. The first center would open in Cedar Ridge inside the very garage where Ethan had quietly rediscovered himself. Reporters gathered outside expecting a polished corporate announcement, but Ethan stood behind no grand podium. Wearing his familiar mechanic shirt beneath a simple work jacket, he invited Claire and Noah to stand beside him. "Everything we are building begins with people who never stop believing that kindness still matters," he said simply. "Businesses grow because communities grow first." Months later, the renovated building welcomed its first class of students. Some had recently lost jobs. Others were young parents searching for stable careers. Retired mechanics volunteered beside experienced engineers, proving that wisdom came in many forms. Claire accepted a position coordinating community outreach, helping families find the same encouragement she had once needed herself. Every afternoon, Noah hurried through the garage after school, proudly helping organize tools and greeting every visitor with the confidence of someone who had grown up surrounded by good people. One evening, as the last rays of sunlight painted the garage doors gold, Noah climbed onto a small ladder, holding a hand-carved wooden sign he had secretly made with the help of one of the instructors. Smiling proudly, he hung it beside Ethan's office door. The sign read, "Reserved for my favorite mechanic." Ethan looked at the words for a long moment before laughing quietly, his eyes shining with grateful emotion. Claire slipped her hand into his, not because he was the chief executive officer of a billion-dollar company, but because he was still the man who had stopped beside a broken car on a rainy afternoon without asking for anything in return. As they stood together watching families leave the garage with renewed hope for tomorrow, Claire realized that wealth had never been the greatest gift Ethan carried. His greatest gift had always been the ability to make people feel seen before they ever knew his name, because in the end, she had never fallen in love with a billionaire. She had fallen in love with the mechanic who reminded her that the strongest engines are built with steel, but the strongest lives are built with kindness.